Hi YouTube. I'm back at my dad's house again and doing a lot of cleanup, foodstuffs and whatnot that have been in the cupboards. It's pretty arduous and not that fun, so I thought, well, I should at least bring my phone along with me so that I can make a video while I'm up here. Even though there's no cell service, not much reason to have a phone, but at least I can make a video. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some things that I've been thinking about. What I think is my forte is just relating human experience as to why I'm not a believer, why I don't find the Christian doctrine or certainly the Calvinist theology or doctrine to be in any way a representation of reality. And so it's quite fitting that I'm at my dad's place because this is sort of one of the things that makes me think quite deeply about this subject. I have an innate sense within me of justice, and I have an innate sense of morality and many other things. And I want to make a video about that as well. I think there's some interesting things to say about this sort of innateness. What does that mean? Is it just a cultural bias? Is it something that my parents, my upbringing and my exposure to my parents had an interplay with? Or is it really innate? Are these things really innate? I think it's something to be careful about, to sort of label things as innate or as human nature as opposed to cultural influence and upbringing. But when I think about this innate justice that I have, certain things really, really don't resonate with me. I'd seen recently where the Bible-thumping wingnut made a comment where he said, the more people I meet, paraphrasing, but it's close enough, the more people I meet, the more the doctrine of hell seems reasonable. And this is stunning to me. The more people I meet, the more faith I have in humanity. Now, maybe he's just meeting the wrong people, and maybe I'm just fortunate I'm meeting the right people, or maybe it's our outlook on what people are and who they are. But this whole notion of hell being just is one of the reasons that I cannot accept the Christian theology. And with respect to my dad's recent passing, it kind of goes something like this. So my dad, now of course, if we're sort of analyzing Calvinism or determinism here, my dad didn't create himself, right? He didn't choose his particular life and his nature. He didn't choose the circumstances of his life. But certainly, even if God didn't choose them, he knows what they're going to be beforehand, and probably the only entity that has any control over whether or not that takes place, whether or not my dad even had the opportunity to exist. My dad was born into a violent family. He was kicked around a lot. He was the oldest of a family of 9, and his dad was pretty brutal. And it seems to me that from the stories my dad used to tell me, his mom used to play head games with the kids. She would turn them in when father got home to receive their beatings for whatever transgressions they'd done during the day. And it was one of these deals where, if somebody wouldn't admit to something, well, then they'd all just get a whooping. And it was pretty brutal. And obviously, as a child, my dad did nothing to deserve this. Children don't deserve to be, in a brutal, violent household. He left when he was 16, finally got up the gumption to leave, and finished high school on his own. Now, his parents even went to the place where he worked and tried to get his hours reduced to kind of force him to come back home. But he persevered. He finished and got his high school diploma. Then he went and put himself through college and got a master's degree in business administration, all on his own. He started a young family, found that the corporate life really wasn't for him, so he moved us all to Canada and started a life that he did not understand. He had, I think, some idealistic ideas about moving out to the bush and living off the land, but he didn't have a clue. But he did it. He pulled it off. He was very successful at it. He ended up becoming, a beekeeper, and he was a successful gardener and fruit tree grower and carpenter and craftsman and many different things. We had no running water, no electricity. We had outhouses when we first started, and he managed to figure out how to make all of that work. Was pretty successful in I would say, the middle part of his life. But really, he was always troubled. He was always living in fear. And I think the fear of his father's violence never really left him. And when his dad died, things seemed to change. It was almost as though the tormentor was now gone, and that caused a shift in him. And that was the beginning, I think, of his mental illness. And he ended up being diagnosed bipolar. And his life took basically a steady ramp downhill from that point, to the point where he was living in the house that I'm in now. And it's a mess. And it's really sad to see that someone with so much promise, he was an incredibly intelligent person, but I think he had demons inside. There was a little child inside that never really got to reconcile the things that had happened to him. And ultimately, he ended up passing away from a blood clot, which may or may not have been partially due to a lot of the medications he was on to stabilize his bipolar disorder. Long story short, here's a guy who didn't choose his life, didn't choose his circumstances, whose life was really bookended by misery and tragedy and brutality. And now, after all of that, his just reward is an eternity in hell. I'm sorry, but the justice within me just can't comprehend that. That's not justice. And if, as a lot of Christians will say, that they will insist that these things are sort of innate in us, just like our knowledge of God and that sort of thing, that our sense of morality and justice are innate, well, this doesn't comport with my innate sense of justice. And for that reason alone, I would reject the theology. That's reason enough for me. And that's just one of billions upon billions of countless examples I could give of people who do not deserve an eternity of torment for an existence that they did not get to choose, a nature which they did not get to choose, and sometimes some pretty awful circumstances that colored their life. My grandparents were religious, and my dad rejected the religion when he left home. Well, coming from people who brutalized him, that kind of would taint someone against religion now, wouldn't it? Can you see that? So can he really be all that much blamed for rejecting religion? And for this he deserves an eternity of torment in hell? I don't think anybody deserves infinite punishment for finite crimes is an injustice in and of itself. And so there's a conflict here, right, with the notion of an all-just God and perfect justice, and then an unjust punishment. And you can tell me that that we have this nature, et cetera, all day long. But again, the table doesn't make itself. We didn't get to choose this nature. We didn't get to choose the opportunity to not be sinful, to be completely moral creatures. We weren't given that opportunity. And so, just relating it on a personal level, I'm really trying to express here why I don't believe in the doctrine, why it just doesn't resonate with me, and why ultimately I don't think I can accept it. And I'll just end this video by saying the interesting thing to me, and this was a topic of conversation last night as well, is that it's kind of like Nancy Pelosi saying, we have to pass the bill so you can see what's in the bill. This whole idea that I have to accept the Christian faith before I can have a regenerate mind that can then actually understand the doctrine is kind of preposterous too, right? This is illogical and irrational. We don't do this in any other facet of our lives. And so, it's just sort of another reason why I can't get past it. I'm going to end this on a bit of a high note, or it's high and low. This house is eerily quiet, and I realized today what's missing. And what's missing is my dad turning up his favorite Little Feat song and just wailing away. He used to do that. And I'll admit, it's been many, many years since I've heard him do that, but I can remember that like it was yesterday. So I'm trying to figure out how to get his stereo working here, so at least I can crank the tunes and listen to some of his favorite music while I'm working. Thanks, everyone, very much for watching. Have a great weekend.